call the meeting of the City Council for the City of Essex Junction for Wednesday, August 10th, 2022 to order. Thank you all for being here. Do we have any agenda additions or changes tonight?
None from staff.
Councilors? Is that feedback from our end, or if there's anybody who's attending the meeting virtually who is not speaking, if you could please make sure you're muted, that'd be appreciated.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, it was me.
It's all good, Mike. All right, so we have no agenda additions or changes, no need to approve the agenda. That will bring us into public to be heard. This is a portion of tonight's meeting where if there are any members of the public who wish to bring something to the board's attention that is not on the agenda, then now is the time to do so. I will prioritize those in the room. Is there anybody here this evening who'd like to bring something to our attention that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no hands, I will turn to Zoom World. Please go ahead, raise your hands in the Zoom World if there is anything you'd like to bring to our attention about something that is not on the agenda. Okay. Deb, I see your hands up. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Sorry, I was unmuting where I do it for Teams. It didn't work. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. This is my first city council meeting live, and I'm very excited to be here. Before I start, I just want to make one personal comment. Andrew, I gave you a vote of confidence. Okay, so now. You're welcome. Thank you for everything you do, all of you. Okay, so here we go. I'm sorry that I'm starting off on a negative note, but I have to because I went crazy this weekend, and I think it was because we had some really bad guests in town. And what I mean by bad is that they were very intrusive. They made so much noise that we had to stop conversations because we couldn't hear each other, and we were sitting 3 feet apart. It was the car show, and it was the cars. The noise was obnoxious. It was loud. It didn't stop. I had a meeting on Friday, and people asked me if I was okay because at one point, the one that sounded like gunshots went off. I jumped. The cat jumped out of the window. That's really obnoxious. And I think that that interferes with our ability to pursue happiness. So I really want to consider not renewing that contract for next year. I don't know if we can, like maybe, I know it wasn't good for the planet with all those cars, and I know the noise was obnoxious, and I know I wasn't the only one frustrated by it. So I just want you to please consider that. And then there's one more thing. There's a front porch forum conversation going on about the cars that are not part of the car show. And I just want to say that I appreciate the young man who wanted to talk about it, but I also want the police to know that the car wash on weekends is where they go for an echo chamber, and I can verify it. The other thing, I used to have a friend that called me Gladys Kravitz. I'm going to be Gladys. Thank you, Raj. So I have actually been making videotapes. This is really crazy, but I've been making videotapes at 5 o'clock in the morning when the dumpsters are getting emptied. And I have sent emails to the Red Can family and the Cassell people and let them know that please stop. And they don't listen. So Monday mornings, they get an early start, and so do I, and I don't want to. So I would just like to bring that to your attention. I don't think you're going to do anything about it, but at least if you know, and maybe somebody listens and reaches out to them. And that's all I got. But otherwise, everything's great. And life is good.
Great. Thank you, Deb. I wish I had some great responses other than to say thank you. And I'll talk with our management team about what you're raising here.
Thank you.
Deb, sorry, Deb, could you just tell me the location where you're seeing the dump trucks early?
Yeah, they go to Dunkin' Donuts. That's usually if they catch a tailwind. That's Monday mornings around, around 5 o'clock. It's funny because they woke up my husband while I was videotaping, so I didn't want to save that video. But so that's the pattern. Is Mondays. At Dunkin' Donuts, and they do a couple of the places, but the trees have leaves right now, so I can't see all the places. But it's right around the fairgrounds, across the street from there. And then the other one is on Thursdays, And that one's wicked early. But they only do 1 or 2, so they don't last long.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And anybody else in Zoom land? Great, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we will bring it back to the board and move into business item 5A, which is to consider a resolution of appreciation for the city manager recruitment and hiring planning committees.
Yeah, Andrew, the memo is in there, but obviously you all back in January took the initiative to engage the citizens in the hiring process, recruitment and hiring process. You had 11 folks volunteer and accepted all of them and put them onto two different committees, which obviously has led now to a new city manager being hired. And so certainly they put a lot of time and effort into this, and it was a fruitful one. 22 applicants from a variety of places that ultimately led to 6 interviews, 2 finalists, and a final selection. So the resolution is there for you all.
Thank you, Brad. I also want to make sure that it's known that we also had participation from 2 of our counselors. We had Amber Tebow and George Tyler, who were also active in these efforts. So I really appreciate both of your efforts from our board to make sure that connection was there. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, I'd let the resolution speak for itself, and if we'd have a motion to approve of the resolution, it would be great if someone were willing to make that and read the resolution aloud. Which is a great role for our vice president, maybe.
Sure. I'll read it first and make the motion, or she want me to make the motion and read it?
I think if you start off with the motion.
Okay. I move that we approve the following resolution for the members of the city manager recruitment and hiring committees, which reads as follows. Whereas the City of Essex Junction charter was overwhelmingly approved by voters in November of 2021, and it was clear that the city endeavored to be independent and have its own management. And whereas the village trustees in January 2022 expressed an interest in involving the citizenry in the planning process to recruit and hire the first ever city manager for the City of Essex Junction. And whereas the trustees advertised for community volunteers to fill the roles for the recruitment and hiring of our first manager, and 11 members of the community applied. And whereas the trustees decided to include all of the interested community volunteers and thus appointed 2 separate committees, a recruitment planning committee and hiring planning committee. And whereas both committees began their work in March and concluded by June of 2022, they successfully designed a plan for recruitment and hiring of our first manager. And whereas their efforts led to 22 applicants from 19 paid advertisements and the outreach to 15 organizations, whereby 12 applicants were from Vermont and 10 were from other states, 8 who most recently were municipal administrators, and 14 who were most recently from other related positions. And whereas that led to 6 interviews, 2 finalists, and ultimately the final selection of Regina Mahoney by the City Council as the first city manager of the City of Essex Junction, Vermont's 10th city. Now therefore be it resolved, on this day, Wednesday, August 10th, 2022, the Essex Junction City Council expresses its appreciation to Bridget Meyer, Gabrielle Stevenson, Maggie Massey, Mary Moyer, Mike Plagueman, Mike Thorne, Christina Papadopoulos, Jacob Law, Chitan Katka, and John Warmer for your efforts in the senior manager recruitment and hiring planning committees that resulted in the hiring of our first ever city manager. We thank you for your time and service to our community. I think some of you are here, so thank you in person.
Thank you, Raj. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, George. Councilors, any further discussion?
I don't have any to add my thanks.
All right. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Great, so that passed unanimously. Thank you all. Thank you again, Raj, for reading this. Thank you to the members of the committees who did step up and really help to bring us to where we are. So thank you. Which will bring us into business item 5B and to discuss a ballot item to join Green Mountain Transit. And I believe we have John Moore from Green Mountain Transit. Yep. Please feel free.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us. My name is John Moore. I'm the general manager for Green Mountain Transit, joined by Paul Boning, who's the commissioner currently representing the town of Essex, also the treasurer on the GMT Board of Commissioners. So there is a presentation in your meeting packet. I'm happy to go through the presentation or just answer questions based on your preference. Just let us know.
I think maybe for those who are in attendance, just do a very quick walkthrough of the presentation, not necessarily read bullet by bullet or anything like that, but just
Sure.
hit the highlights.
Happy to. So I don't know who's controlling it, but we can just scroll down. So just a quick overview of who we are. Back in 1973, the Chittenden County Transportation Authority was created as the first and only state transit authority. In 2016, we did combine with two rural properties, one in Washington County and one up in Franklin Grand Isle County. And so today we provide service in 6 counties in Northwest Vermont. We are the largest transit agency in the state, as you can imagine, directed by a 13-member board of commissioners. And we have about 180 employees, 160 vehicles, and close to 1,000 bus stops. So just some quick ridership data. This is a trend line over the last couple of years. As you can imagine, we saw a significant drop in ridership during COVID, and we've bounced back from that. We provided 1.73 million rides in fiscal year 22. That's about 75% of our pre-pandemic ridership. If you look at just our local routes, it's about 85% of the pre-pandemic. The commuter routes have been slower to come back with teleworking and some other factors. In terms of our budget, we have about a $23.5 million total budget. We have essentially 2 parts of our business. One is Chittenden County, which is our urban business, and one is our rural business. The difference there is just how we get our federal funding, essentially. In Chittenden County, we get it directly. On the rural side, we get it through the Vermont Agency of Transportation. These figures are a little bit skewed for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are still spending some COVID relief funds we received. So the federal share is quite a bit larger than it normally is. And then I will point out that that purple slice is our operating revenues, which is basically our fare revenue. Thanks to some transportation bill funding, about 1.2 million we received this fiscal year, we're actually fare free. So most of that purple slice is actually shifted to that red slice, which is the state operating revenue. So for Essex Junction specific services, we operate 2 fixed routes. The first route is the Essex Junction, connects downtown Burlington out to Five Corners. Amtrak is the terminus stop for that route. Stops at 40th and Allen in the UVM Medical Center, as well as downtown Winooski. Provided about 370,000 boardings in fiscal year 22. Our second highest route, and on an annual basis, that flip-flops. Sometimes that's our busiest route. So a critical route in our system and to the public. And it does get our highest service level. We provide service 7 days a week. We're running every 20 minutes from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so our highest frequency, and we operate just short of midnight, Monday through Saturday, so a pretty high level of service. The Williston-Essex route, a much lower ridership of about 27,000 boardings in FY22, connects the outlets, Amtrak, and then out to Taft's Corners. Much lower level of service. We do operate 6 days a week, but that bus runs every 75 minutes. Roughly from 7 a.m. until 7:15 p.m. Besides those 2 fixed route services, we do operate the complimentary ADA service. We actually contract that to SSTA, and that service is for eligible passengers within 3/4 of a mile of a bus route that cannot access that bus for disability or other reasons. So those folks still, under the federal regulations, have access to that door-to-door transportation. In Essex, we also have a unique agreement with the Essex Senior Van. So we lease 2 senior vans to the town of Essex, operated by the Parks and Recreation Department. That provides free transportation for residents over the age of 60. Those vans are 80% funded through federal dollars, 10% from the Vermont Agency of Transportation, and then the town kicks in 10%. of the local match. So that may be one area that, as we go through this process, we'll have to discuss how that's allocated. In terms of our overall budget summary, and this is just focusing on the Chittenden County service area, again, roughly a $16 million budget. We are fare free through June 30th of next year, thanks to those transportation bill funds. We are experiencing some significant cost pressures. Number one, the ADA program, our contractor, same pressures we have, higher fuel, labor market is crazy. But also as the population ages, the demand for that service goes up, and it's a critical program, but there are some cost pressures that creates. Fuel obviously has been a budget pressure for everybody. Just to put it in perspective for GMT, we initially budgeted $2.75 a gallon per diesel. We paid $4.77 a gallon in Q4 of fiscal year 22, and we're buying about 330,000 annual gallons. So that has been and is expected to continue to be a real pressure on our budget. Wages and benefits with the labor market. We recently ratified 3 collective bargaining agreements, which we're very happy about. We do feel that we're providing market competitive wages, but that did add some expenses to our budget. And we're still having a lot of challenges recruiting, especially for commercial drivers and skilled mechanics. And then fair revenue impacts with the drop in ridership. If we were to be charging a fare, we've budgeted about $700,000 less than what we collected pre-pandemic just based on those ridership impacts. So the transportation bill funding helped with some of that, but didn't offset all of that loss in fare revenue. So one of our primary goals for FY24 is to get back at least to the pre-pandemic ridership. If that doesn't happen, we'll have some revenue shortages in that area. So specific to the town of Essex fiscal year 23 assessment. So historically, all the services provided in the village of Essex Junction were always billed through the town of Essex. So the FY23 fixed route assessment, which pays for those 2 routes, the Essex Junction and the Essex Williston, was $227,000. That included a 4% increase from fiscal year 22. That's kind of our standard annual increase on the assessment amounts. The second part of the assessment is the ADA program. This is a little bit more complicated because it's actually based on 2 things. Number one, the total cost of that program, and then allocated by the actual usage in each municipality. Per our charter, 50% of those costs are used by federal funds. So the member towns paid the other 50%. So for fiscal year 23, the total ADA program budget was $1.56 million. The 50% number of that, $780,000. In Essex, there was 14% of the total ADA rides. So we applied that 14% to that $780,000 figure, and that's how we come up with the $110,000 assessment for the town of Essex. There is some potential good news. While we think the program cost will increase, the share of actual ADA rides in Essex dropped to 9%. So that should help offset some of the program costs. So we're still working on that FY24 budget, but hopefully there's at least roughly a $0 increase to that program for the town of Essex for FY23. So this is very texty. I won't read all this, but this is from our charter about some information on membership. So essentially what it says, if there's a municipality in our service area that wants to join GMT, it's a 2-step process. Step 1, our board needs to pass a resolution authorizing a public vote. We have our August board meeting next Tuesday. There will be an action item on the agenda to approve a resolution. That resolution has been reviewed by our board leadership committee. They fully supported it. I anticipate our board will strongly support the resolution. So once that is done, that would authorize the City of Essex Junction to hold a public vote. And then assuming that public vote was positive, the City of Essex Junction would become a GMT member as soon as fiscal year 2024. That really means 2 things. Number one, we would assess the city, and next slide we'll get into some projection details. And then number 2, the city would have a seat on the GMT Board of Commissioners. So I underlined the word projected. If I had a highlighter, I would highlight it as well. These are initial projections. We have not started our FY24 budget process. We'll be doing that very soon. But these numbers are based on, for the fixed route, the percentage of service operated in the town of Essex that occur in the village or the city of Essex Junction. So that's 81%. So we took the fixed route assessment in FY23, 81% would be billed to the city of Essex Junction. That includes that anticipated 4% annual increase. And then for the ADA service, we took that $110,000 FY23 assessment. We looked at the individual users of that program, and 65% lived in the city of Essex Junction. So we applied that 65% to that $110,000 number. Again, that program cost budget still needs to be developed. But again, because the total ridership share went down, we think that will hopefully offset. The net impact is that there would be about a $263,000 projected assessment amount to the city of Essex Junction for the fixed route service and then for the ADA program.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So for let's take the bus that does the Essex Williston loop, Essex Junction Williston, starts here, goes up into the town, continues out to Williston, comes back, right?
Yeah.
So your ridership projections, is that for everybody that's on that bus, or is that only, how are you breaking up the town and the city then? Is it, are you counting fare payers or riders as they board at the Amtrak station? Because after a few stops, it's in the town. And so are you splitting those riders?
So for the assessment,
And same, I guess, for the number 2 that goes out as soon as it hits Colchester and somebody gets on. Is that an Essex rider anymore? Essex Junction? So how are you calculating the ridership when you're doing the assessment?
so for the assessment, it's not based on ridership. It's based on the service hours. So we actually calculate, for the Essex Junction route, for example, 33% of the service hours are in Burlington, 33% are in Winooski, 33% are in Essex Junction.
Sorry, I misunderstood that.
Yeah. So yeah, those are strictly based on service hours.
Okay, great.
Just a quick follow-up from that one. Just that number 2, you talk about how 33% are it's split a third between Essex, Winooski, and Burlington, even though there's a portion in Colchester, because Colchester has never been a part of Green Mountain Transit. That's why they're not assessed for that stretch of Route 15 by St. Mike's.
So yes, Colchester is not a member. We do have a service agreement with them, so they do actually pay the same assessment. It's not an assessment; it's a funding agreement, but they do pay into that route. So the only difference between Colchester and this potential structure with Essex Junction is that they don't have a seat on the board, but they are billed in the same way as if they were a member, just without the voting seat at the board.
Okay, so instead of it being 33%, they have that equal proportion
Yeah,
based on service hours.
It's
whatever.
relatively small because
Yeah.
it's a small stretch on College Parkway in the fort, but that's relatively new. We entered into that agreement with the town of Colchester just 2 or 3 years ago. So,
May I add something?
Yeah.
I think it's important to point out at this point, you certainly, everyone here knows it, but maybe for folks who are listening in, is that this looks like a tax increase for Essex Junction, and it is, but it's not as big as $223,000 because approximately 45 to 50% of what the town was paying was coming from Essex Junction already. So I'm guessing it looks more like my rough math looks me about $100,000 actual increase that we will be paying, that will come from revenue coming from Essex Junction to GMT.
yeah, what I'll say is the allocation amounts are based on if we were billing the town of Essex as we've historically done. Besides the 4% fixed route increase, there's no other increases built into those projections.
Right.
So this is just a quick list of some exciting things we have going on at GMT. Number 1 is fleet electrification. As I mentioned, diesel prices are going up, and the climate benefits of electric buses are something that we want to explore. We have 2 existing electric buses in service. We have a grant application in right now for 6 more. Also working with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. This is probably something of strong interest if the city does join GMT. There's been an identification that the property tax funding, local funding of transit in Vermont is just not sustainable. We can't sustain existing services, let alone increase services. So through a partnership with the Regional Planning Commission and the Vermont Agency of Transportation, There is a study to identify a statewide revenue source to pay the non-federal match of transit. So that could potentially make these assessments a moot point at some point in the future, which we would certainly support, and I assume you would as well. So that's something that we will be reaching out to all of our stakeholders and partners on, and soon in the legislative session. And then the last kind of exciting thing I'll mention is we have a microtransit pilot project happening in Montpelier. But essentially, it's a Uber-based technology, app-facing, convenience increasing service model. People can go on their phone and say, I want to get from point A to point B in a predefined zone. Bus will show up like an Uber. It wouldn't replace a route providing 400,000 boardings a year, but in some of the neighborhoods off the main travel corridors, it could provide that first mile, last mile. So we are investigating that, and right now it's Montpelier, but there could be other applications in Chittenden County.
Just along the lines of what you just discussed there, I saw Tilly Drive up there. There's potential for an exit ramp at the 116 overpass right there in South Burlington on the interstate.
Yep.
And that ramp would actually end up at Tilly Drive there. So that would probably be a maybe change a route that you might have. Also, the Champlain Parkway, once that's completed, that would also impact, I guess, your ridership and your buses traveling down instead of Pine Street, getting off and doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be some routing changes for sure with those projects.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Tilly, and I was going to bring this up anyway. It's loosely connected only because you're in the room now. So I apologize in advance, I guess. But we just had a very exciting business. We have the community health center open a big location here, and they're moving their administrative offices here. So there'll be a new old North End location, and now they're up here. We're off
Main Street.
off Main Street, Brickyard. Now that's not that far from the Amtrak station, but for a lot of the populations they're going to be surveying, it'd be great if the company could consider, is there a possibility to change the approach or the departure from the train station in any way to sort of loop that in, not going into that facility potentially, but, I'm even thinking going up to Educational Drive, and I don't know how familiar you are with the city, but basically going up and left, and that would get people within a block as opposed to people that potentially have health issues that might prevent them from walking from the Amtrak to there.
Sure.
It is kind of going to what you were saying about that last mile, but it's far enough so that it could be an issue, but it's close enough so that it might just be a tweak. At UVM Health, Fletcher Allen was there before. There's a slightly different population base, and it's a recommitment to the community by a good health partner. So we just thought I'd bring it up and see if there's over time a way to explore, is there a need actually, and is there a possibility to get that tweak in place where maybe the bus doesn't need to come out, turn left and go this way. Maybe it can come out past the train station, go more towards the high school and come around that way. And that would be the new route.
Yep. And the number 10, the Essex Wilson actually does have a stop at Brickyard. So it's a lower frequency every 75 minutes, but there would be some service available. That actually goes down Educational Drive, then comes back out on 15.
Right.
We do always analyze our routes. If there's a major trip generator, we have to balance that with the impacts on other passengers, but we always look at things like that. So we can certainly follow up on that.
Great.
Along the lines of analyzing your routes and the ridership, so when events such as the CVE, the annual fair, Champlain Fair, do you actually alter your route, your number of routes for that, or is that just you keep consistent, you don't bother to change?
We don't change a schedule frequency. We do have some unscheduled backup buses, and those are for capacity help as needed. So if there's a busy trip and it's over capacity, we'll send up one of the backup buses to make sure people can get there. But we don't make any schedule changes specific for the fair.
Okay, just curious.
And I see Amber has her hand up. Sorry if you had that up for a while.
No, it just went up. You're all good, Andrew. Thanks, John, for the presentation. My question, I think you might have sort of just answered with discussing Colchester, but what happens if you put this to vote and the municipality votes down joining the authority?
Well, there'd be a few options. I think the nuclear option would be that we would stop the bus in 40th and Allen. I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. The other option would be working with the city council on a potential service agreement, which would be structured similar to the assessment amounts without being an official member of GMT. So, that could be a sticky conversation, but one that we would certainly engage in.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yeah, it's a good question, Amber. I can't imagine our community saying no to that. We see how frequently the buses come through. We know how important it is to the community as a whole. So I hope that doesn't become an issue that we have to deal with. A couple of questions. You mentioned how that these are highlighted projected budget numbers. Around when would these be finalized approximately?
So I would say we'll have some more refined numbers by November, December. By our charter, we have to have our budget finalized by February 15th. We try to have it done by the January board meeting. So, we are in the process of starting our FY23 budget adjustment, which will be a fairly heavy lift with the fuel prices and some other changes in the world since we passed that budget. That will inform our 24 budget. So I would say, late fall, we'll have more refined numbers, which may not be the official numbers, but we'll have a better sense of what those look like, especially for the ADA program.
Right. That's helpful. And then my last question, we know about how, I'm sure you know about the studies of having fare free. It helps to increase ridership, of course, helping to break down any barriers, helps to increase ridership. With the fare free portion currently being done through the pandemic federal funding, once that goes away, is the hope then to have this study with the CCRPC to help show and or demonstrate ways to get funding to help replace that? Or would that then be something that might come back to us for a way to replace that?
So the CCRPC study would identify enough revenue generation for a single source state revenue that would allow all transit agencies in the state of Vermont to operate fare free indefinitely. So, that may be a uphill climb at the legislature to find a single source or multiple source, potentially revenue replacement of property taxes for transit. It's not really new tax revenue. It's kind of just shifting from one tax burden to another. So we're hopeful for that, but that plan does include enough revenue to continue fare free.
Okay. And then if that doesn't pan out, then the federal funding end up going away, I assume then would that need to come back to the municipalities and the commissioners to figure out whether to go back to the municipalities and ask?
Yes, I think more than likely the staff developed FY24 budget proposal would include an assumption that we go back to fares, which will likely be around the $2 million mark. There's been a lot of conversations at the board level. If we can afford that with our local partners without the federal funding, that would be a pretty heavy lift. It would be essentially doubling the amount of local funds that we receive from our municipal partners. But there have been a lot of conversations on the board, and so I'm sure those will continue, and we'll try to find the best path forward.
Any other questions?
No, just for the record, I did the math real quick. It looks like a net $93,000 increase of revenue coming out of Essex Junction.
Gotcha. Yeah. Awesome. Staff, were there any questions on your end?
No, I'm good. I think, certainly as we get closer to the end of our agreement with Essex in regards to the senior vans, there eventually will need to be conversation about what our plans are, but it's not relevant today. It's just, I think I'm just saying it aloud to make sure we're all aware and revisit that with GMT and as well as the town.
Great. Thank you, Brad.
If I could just mention that I live at 31 Beach Street, so I represent the town of Essex. I think my term is up in 24. So at some point between now and then, if I want to continue and you want to continue to have me,
Right.
then we'll have to have that conversation.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, we thank you for being here.
Yep.
Certainly appreciate it. And
Thank you. My contact information is on the presentation, and I will follow up with interim manager Luck on the results of the board resolution next Tuesday. But I am certain no issues.
yeah,
Thank you.
great. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
good night.
All right, that will bring us into business item 5C to discuss the ballot item to join the Winooski Valley Park District. And I do not believe we have anybody from the Winooski Valley
Yes, I'm here.
tonight. Or there's someone online.
Yes,
My apologies.
that's okay. With the way technology works, I'm glad that you can see me. So thank you for your time.
If you'd like, go right ahead.
Okay, I think, so you controlling the presentation online? We can just scroll through the materials. Why don't we scroll through this, because I think this will be a good setup. My name's Nick Warner. I've been the executive director at Winooski Valley Park District for the last 8 years. The Park District was created in 1972, and Essex was one of the founding communities. And I included in this presentation, obviously won't read through everything, but I put in our bylaws and some historical documents so you can have some context. Basically, it's a very simple model, which is becoming more popular across the country, which is municipalities band together to have a regional district that is both a incorporated Vermont municipality and an incorporated 501c3 nonprofit. We're a hybrid organization. Band together to identify and acquire high-value conservation properties, high value in terms of their ecological importance, and put them under permanent protection, usually through a third-party conservation easement with one of our nonprofit partners, and create free public access in perpetuity to those properties. This model has been ongoing since 1972. You can keep scrolling through. It has grown to the point now that we have 19 properties and almost 1,800 acres under ownership and management. We carry no debt on those properties. They're all owned in fee simple, along with the conservation easements. We also manage quite a bit of shoreline and hiking trails, and this is active management. So we actually do quite a bit to maintain these properties. And the way the system works is there are 7-member towns. You guys would be the 8th. I'm hoping you'll be the 8th. And there is a board of trustees that meets monthly. Currently, Jeff Tice is the combined Essex, actually no more, right? Because you're a new municipality, but he has been representing the combined village and town of Essex on the board. He's the head of human resources at the Howard Center, and he's been quite good. So the way it works is we identify through willing seller, willing buyer situations, properties through a variety of means. They're offered to us sometimes as donations. We're in a tight network with the various conservation nonprofits and state agencies, Fish and Wildlife, and so forth, and obviously with the municipalities. So we find out about properties in a variety of ways, and we go through a very careful screening to determine whether a property is appropriate for us to purchase and or accept a donation of, and to put into permanent management. You can keep going on the presentation. It's a multi purpose organization, although our environmental education component has been, I won't say farmed out, but it's been, we've been using partners in recent years. Currently, we lease to Forest Preschool. I'm here at Ethan Allen Homestead, which is where our home office is, and they provide, under their contract with us, they have to provide environmental education services, which is part of their business model. We also have our operations manager, Lauren Chakotay, who typically would be on these calls, but she's on vacation today. is very active in creating service learning opportunities, working with various colleges and schools. We have dozens of groups that visit our parks and do service learning projects and study projects and so forth. It's a huge living classroom. You can keep going. And a big part of our model is utilizing volunteer labor and leveraging resources. So we work with, in fact, we've worked with Essex Rotary recently, Williston Rotary, Boy Scout troops. There's a number of corporations that are come back annually with groups of people, and we plan for and set up specific projects around trail restoration, shoreline restoration, plantings, invasive management, and so forth. So that's a big part of our model, because we have 3 full-time employees and 2 or 3 seasonals during the summer, and our whole operation is run by that group. You can keep going. There's just some good photographs of people out there doing the labor. We started about 6 years ago providing fee-for-service labor for our member towns for properties that they own that are outside of our portfolio. Done quite a bit of work with South Burlington and Williston, also the city of Winooski, and most recently with Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, and we anticipate doing some more work with them. It's a great deal for everyone because we're all covered under the same insurance, which is passive. So that issue is quite easy to deal with. And basically we take the hourly rates of our crew and do a 50% multiplier and charge that as our fee. And it's a great deal for the towns, and it's a great deal for us. It's a revenue generator, and it's a way to get projects done quickly and efficiently. I put this up here because this is literally across the river from you guys. This is our newest park that we're working on with the town of Williston. It's a parcel that was donated to the town. 29-acre parcel directly on the river. It's got very high conservation values, and also is going to serve 3 neighborhoods that go right up against the park. It's already being used, not in a very managed way, but people go for walks there and go fishing and so forth. So we've been, over the last several years, working to put together a way to make this park really operate as a park. And it's taken a while, but we've worked closely with Trinity Baptist Church. If you look down at the bottom of this image, you see that light blue line that shows an access point that will go from the back of their property. And they have built a parking lot and trail access and easement into their plan for new housing development on their property. We're very grateful to them. They've been a great partner, and it's taken 3 years to get to this point. And this winter, we expect to finalize that piece. Then you see that blue solid line, which was an existing trail easement that the town of Williston had secured. And then the yellow line is the park itself. So between those 3 elements, we're going to have a place for people to park their cars and to get access to the park and make it really a park that's going to be available to anyone who wants to go there. Plus, there's some informal trails from the neighborhoods. We're going to work with them to see if they want to improve them or shut them off or reroute them. So this is just a really good example of how we work. We have two properties they're now in Essex town, right up against your border, I must say, the Woodside Natural Area. You guys are probably very familiar with these. Woodside is actually one of our most heavily used properties. It's got about a 1-mile loop trail, which is perfect for a lot of people. It's one of the best birding sites in Chittenden County, and has access to Winooski River. And then Overlook Park is right along Route 15 above it. You can go to the next slide. As I was saying, what you get with us is partnership and leverage. So a big part of what we do is raise money. Basically, all of our major capital projects and all of our acquisitions are funded through grants, many of which I'm sure you're familiar with: Land and Water Conservation Fund, VOREC recently. There's a bunch of sources we go to. This year, we have about $350,000 worth of capital projects that we're working on so far. I anticipate some more grants coming in. Interestingly, right here at the homestead where the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum operates, which actually the Park District owns, and we have a lease agreement with the museum, the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center, which has been operating here for the last few years, is going to construct a couple of new rooms inside the museum barn and expand their operations and get staffed up for their operations here. So we're very excited about that. That means more revenues for us. It means improving a facility and so forth. We also, as I said, we rented Forest Preschool, so that's income. The contracted park maintenance. Also, in the last couple of years, because we are a nonprofit and because we have the ability to do this, we've acted as a fiscal agent, and then we charge some fees for that. And we've done it for, we've also done it gratis for smaller grants, like Lake Champlain Committee needed a fiscal agent for an Asian clan grant. And so that's another way that we bring in some income to our shop is acting as a fiscal agent. So that's the big picture. I wanted to sort of run you through that. I wanted to emphasize that our board is incredibly active. So it's the monthly meetings and the interaction and the level of detail that they participate in for me is very helpful. I've worked in municipal government for most of my career. And we really have a super board. Everyone is they're on pins and needles, and they're hoping that the ballot item will go through and that we can have an 8th board member on the board of trustees. And if you keep going through the materials, what I've provided is here's the original agreement from 1972 that just lays out how it all works. It's a pretty unique setup, but as I mentioned, I've discovered that this type of organization is being replicated increasingly across the country. Interestingly, in places where there's been major natural disasters and the economies have been rebuilt around creating new recreation districts. So it's a unique model that is getting some more favor. Okay, here's a good place to stop. Here's our operating budget. And this shows fiscal year 21, the fiscal year 22 that just ended, and then our budget that we're in now for fiscal year 23. And I'll answer some questions that you're probably going to have right away, which is, how much is it going to cost the new city of Essex to be a member? So Brad and I did a little back and forth. He came up with some pretty good numbers, around $25,000 would be a good estimate. The way it works, and let me give you a quick explanation, is we take the equalized grand list for each town, and we take the population of each town, and we figure out what percentage of the whole that town is relative to the other towns, and then we come up with a percentage, and then we take the number that we're asking the towns to commit each fiscal year and doing what we call a fair share distribution. And if you go to the next page, this is one of the more popular things at each year's select board meeting, because I go around to the various towns and I do an annual presentation, as most of your regional organizations will. And you see here, this compares fiscal year 22 and 23. And for each town, if you start, we'll go on the Essex line, the population that we got from the census was 21,890, and then it increased to 22,094 in fiscal year 23. And then we calculate the percentage of population for the whole district, all 7 towns. And then we do a similar thing for the equalized education property values. And then we average those two to come up with a percentage. And based on that, you guys were, in this current year, 64,787 is the Essex town and city combined allocation. Brad was doing a rough estimate that Probably 42% of that is going to be about where the city is going to lie. We're going to try similar to, and I really appreciate the past presentation. I think running a bus service has got to be the hardest job on earth. But we're in the same situation where our budget's being developed now for fiscal year 24. Our timeline is we have a draft budget in September, and then we start going around to select boards in October and November. So you'll have good numbers by that time. We're going to try to keep our ask to the towns. We're going to try to keep the increase to 3%. We're going to try. We're going to really try to discipline ourselves to do that this coming year. If we're able to do that, then my back of the envelope estimate for your responsibility would be around the 28,000 range. So if you're looking for a placeholder for a draft budget for fiscal year 24, I think that's probably a pretty good number. And I'm certainly not going to promise that that's the number, but that's good guesswork based on what I think our budget increase is going to be, and based on, like I said, we don't have the exact numbers yet, but I think that would be a good number to utilize. All right, I've done a lot of talking. Are there any questions at this point?
That was a very thorough presentation, and you've already answered my questions.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of our counselors, Amber, go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to ask you the same question that I just asked John,
Okay.
which is what is the implication of the vote being voted down, and no vote to join?
Well, this has never happened before, so it doesn't trigger anything. And we had our attorney sort of look at the original stuff. He said, if they say no, they have the right to say no. So there's no. If you were currently a member and you said no, it would take another fiscal year for you to get out of the relationship. What it would do for us, it would mean that we would need to allocate our annual asks across the 7 towns that are left based on the formula. And it would mean the town of Essex would certainly have a smaller fee than they had in the past, but it would be larger. Everyone else would have to pick up the slack left over. It would just be redistributed across the towns. So it'd be a bit of a political challenge for me to get them to do it. And it would, it's this dance we do, because my job is to run as lean an operation as possible, but also to keep everything super high quality, which fortunately, because we have staff here that have been here a lot longer than I have, makes it a lot easier. My board really feels strongly that the towns, should step up and potentially provide more support. I don't like to compare our operations to other similar operations. I stopped doing that because it completely out of whack in terms of what their operating budgets are. I think we operate a pretty lean ship in terms of our expenditures relative to service. So that was a long meandering answer, but the short answer is it gets redistributed across the remaining towns.
I appreciate it, Nick. Thank you.
Sure.
Andrew, if I could just,
Go ahead, Brad.
just building on Amber's question, we as city folk have been members of the Winooski Valley Park District since 1972, and we've been paying annually. We've been doing that through our membership with the town of Essex. And so this is really a net neutral budget decision, probably.
Yes.
Based on the taxes, based on the fees we are already paying through our town taxes.
Yes.
And currently Burlington, Colchester, the town, Jericho, South Burlington, Winooski, and Williston are all members.
Correct.
So just all of our surrounding communities are supporting, and I know you all know this, but hopefully, the voters recognize that this is the appropriate thing to do.
Well, we hope so. So certainly let me know if I can be of any help in the process.
Will do. We appreciate that. Amber's your hand back up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate that comment, Brad. I just want to be clear that the reason I'm asking the question is so that I can educate the folks who are listening and watching this. I do think it will be important to have a further conversation and further information for the ballot items. But for those who are watching this now, I did want to make sure that they understood this.
It's the question I would have asked also, just to be clear.
Yeah, good point, Amber. And I guess in that way, what I would also say that I was going to hold this comment for later. It's just that in my mind, if we look at the parks that are currently being supported through with the Winooski Valley Park District, we have Colchester Pond, the Overlook and Woodside Park, the Ethan Allen Homestead Park, so on and so forth. And all of those are ones that our communities can walk in without paying a dime for. In large respects because of the Winooski Valley Parks District and this agreement. Whereas if people wanted to go to, say, the Indian Brook Reservoir, people would need to pay a fee to become a member of that to access those ways. This also helps to keep our waterways clean, which we all know then helps to ensure that we have clean drinking water. Yes, there are many benefits to this beyond the fact of it's what we've done for years, just through the town taxes.
I appreciate that. You're reiterating my marketing materials in front of me that you've had to go deeper on this. I could keep you up all night. So no, I appreciate it. Yeah.
We appreciate it, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you, Nick, for being here. Really appreciate your time, and we'll be following up.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick.
Take care.
You too. And on a similar note, let's go to 5D and discuss the ballot item to join the Chittenden County Communications Union District. And hi, Regina.
Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So, you want me to get started?
Yeah, why don't you just kick it right off?
Okay. So, at the Regional Planning Commission, we have been thinking about this broadband issue for probably 1.5 to 2 years. So folks are probably aware that there is a decent amount of state and federal funding going towards broadband infrastructure throughout the state. In Chittenden County, we're in a bit of a different scenario than the rest of the state because the number of unserved and underserved house sites in our region is really minuscule in comparison to the rest of the state. We're at about 4% in that category, and really that means they might have some dial-up phone service or really nothing. And the majority of the public dollars are in place to try to get those folks connected to fiber connection, which is sort of the upper echelon these days. And since we have such a small population that's not served, we were trying to sort of figure out if there's another way to go about doing this. But we have, after all this time, figured out that really the only way to access those funds, even though they're relatively minor, is by creating a communications union district. So a couple other things to keep in mind. The southern part of the county, the majority of those municipalities are in the Waitsfield-Champlain Telecom service area. And Waitsfield-Champlain Telecom has been actively going after the public funds themselves for those municipalities. Bolton is, their funding is already approved and they're going to be completely covered. I believe Charlotte's application is in. I'm not sure if it's decided yet. And then I believe Waitsfield is either in process or already has submitted applications for the rest of their towns. Then Burlington, obviously completely covered by Burlington Telecom. And then the northern part of our county, with Shelburne included, there are some fiber providers. There are some small fiber providers like Waitsfield Champlain Telecom who could go directly to the directly to the Vermont Broadband Board to access this funding. But because the funding is so little, it's not really working great for folks to be able to figure out how to make this happen. And certainly not to the extent where they could serve those underserved people and make it work. Because those underserved locations are underserved for a reason. They have not made financial sense for anybody all this time. So that's why there's a number of towns thinking about this. It's not Chittenden County wide because some of us are in fairly good shape. I'll also mention that Milton has decided to join the Northwest Communications Union District. And Colchester has decided to not put the formation question to their voters. And I'll say that's largely because even if we form this communications union district, there's really a small amount of public dollars here at the table. So that is still going to be an issue, but what we're really thinking is going to work, hopefully, here is that most of these providers are interested in Chittenden County because we have the highest density. And we have about 71% of the county served by cable service right now. And so to overbuild cable to fiber could be a really positive business model for some of these providers. But they're unlikely to communicate and want to deal with individual municipalities. So the idea is we form this communications union district, have a better kind of overall leveraging potential business model for talking with these providers going forward. What else do I want to mention? So Burlington Telecom has come into Winooski, and they have also come into Essex Junction. And I will say, of all of the municipalities with these underserved folks, Essex Junction has probably the fewest of them. Winooski is also in the same boat. So I think the benefit, given that, of Essex Junction, at least even considering putting this question forward to the voters, is just that we don't really know exactly who's going to come to the table to try to serve Chittenden County, and it might just make sense for Essex Junction to be at the table. The other towns that have decided to put this question to the voters are Shelburne, Williston, Essex, South Burlington. I will add that they also have a relatively small amount of folks in this underserved category. Jericho Select Board voted to put this question to the voters, but they then figured out that they can't put yes/no ballot questions on a ballot. They have to do that by voice vote. So they are probably going to hold off. So if 2 towns vote favorably to create the communications union district, at least 2 towns, then the communications union district will be formed, and other municipalities can join just by a vote of the legislative body. I think I'm going to leave it there for questions.
Thank you, Regina. So in a nutshell, the benefit really is at some point in time in the future, there may be some funding that could become available. And so this will allow us to really jump on board with that opportunity sooner rather than, I think though you just said, well, so do we have to have a vote? And if that passes or if that fails, then we could join later with just a vote of a board.
Yeah, so because we need at least 2 municipalities to vote in favor in order to create this district, we're thinking it's probably our odds are better if we get this question on multiple town ballots. But it's also, if I can anticipate Amber's question, if the vote goes down, would you feel comfortable as a city council then voting to join?
Right.
And I think that is a legitimate question to think about. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. There's really, we only need 2 towns to create it. We're also thinking sort of just the more information out there for folks. We're going to be assisting with all kinds of voter education and all of that kind of stuff. The more sort of buzz is out there, the more people might understand this question and might agree to vote in favor. But it is possible to go either way. You would have the opportunity potentially, if it gets created, to join afterwards, even without putting the question to the voters.
Mm-hmm. And if we were to have the vote to join, and if the community decided to join, at this point in time, there is no entity created, there is no budget. So as of today, or likely until the entity is created, there isn't a budgetary impact, though theoretically there may be in the future. It's just at this point in time, it's creating this thing that, again, could provide an opportunity in the future.
Correct. And this doesn't actually have a tax implication at all, because in the state of Vermont, you can't use tax dollars to help fund fiber broadband internet service. So there's actually really, even if and when it's joined, there's really no financial implication other than there may be actual utility infrastructure that might be placed in the city someplace. And if that's in sort of public places, then there may be a slight cost to sort of maintenance and having it there, but that's about it.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you, Regina.
Yeah.
Quick question that maybe I'm misunderstanding. So just swat me down if this is a dumb question. But it talks about undisturbed, and then it talks about real service actually being 100/100, when most people are on 25/3, 50/3. Really, they're talking about being served as arriving at the fiber level. So while it feels like Essex Junction has minuscule numbers of people, 4 or something, that are not served at all, we probably have a very large number, a majority, that are not on fiber, especially with the arrival of Burlington Telecom just about 6 months ago or a year ago. So I guess I'm wondering, how these definitions and how that's going to play out. If, what is adequate broadband, and how is that going to play out with funding decisions? And if that doesn't matter, and we only have 4, according to this, 4 households or 4 entities without service, where are we going to stand if we vote for this in terms of getting attention from, or the benefit of this? In other words, if they look at Williston and then Shelburne and maybe another community that is in far worse shape, I'm wondering where we're going to end up on that list. And I'm kind of wondering if it's at the bottom. There's no cost, I guess, right? And I know that chart says there are no boundaries really. I mean, because it's just going to flow through. They won't necessarily stop at the sign that says City of Essex Junction if the line needs to keep going to another community, right? But
right.
So
yeah,
trying to figure out whether this is worth it, I guess.
Yeah, so it's a really excellent question, and it's tough to answer because we have very little information right now. There's no financial plan to figure out how to serve Chittenden County. There's no real business model in place to figure out exactly how this is all going to work. And part of the thinking from the Vermont Communication Broadband Board is once we get this unified voice, we will have a lot more opportunity to talk with folks. And I think the ultimate goal is that it's going to create a lot more competition for the providers. And so To answer a little bit of your question, the folks that are really in the and unserved category, those are the only folks that can be served with the public dollars.
Okay.
But the state of Vermont has required that service gets to a 100/100 service level, which can only be done by fiber optic lines. So the only way to get to those folks is to eventually overbuild the cable areas to get to them. So the thinking for Chittenden County is that putting this into motion is really going to help everybody who's now served get to fiber, be able to get them a fiber option. Maybe sooner than later. It's possible, again, Burlington Telecom's already coming into Essex Junction. Things are in the works. It's going to eventually happen. That the cable folks are likely served by Burlington Telecom or some other fiber provider. But what is potentially going to happen if we don't take a step and come and play this kind of intermediary role is that those folks who are underserved now will continue to be underserved because there's no public.
Oh no.
Must be she's underserved. Not
Yeah,
anything well.
she's in Burlington, right? I mean, this is not good.
Yeah, it doesn't say much for Burlington Telecom. Lost the connection.
You think she staged this?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Probably,
I
yeah.
think she.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why we need to.
Well, I think
She's actually a mime. She's just like still.
I think her point though about like
Right.
they have to serve those people, so
Yep.
that is going to
Yeah.
have to trail through. I think makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
I'm also curious, and if she comes back, if down the road, because a community like ours with its density, really could be looking at not a physical connection but a wireless connection.
Right.
And I'm curious if this could eventually lead to opportunities for that. Oh, look, she's back.
Hi again.
Hi, sorry.
No worries.
I could hear you guys laughing. And then I realized why.
At your expense.
Appreciate the laughter, so thank you.
Your point made a lot of sense in terms of what I was wondering. When you said those four have to be served anyway, it's got to get to them, and so that build out. So that makes a lot of sense.
When you were, before you came back, Regina, Raj was talking about wireless connection, and it seems to me I recall, I think maybe at the regional planning meeting, one of the meetings we had years ago, discussion about building towers for cellular towers throughout the state. And there was a window that closed maybe 4 or 5 years ago where they could put up towers, basically bypassing some of the permitting process that exists now. And that kind of expedited the businesses to, whatever, AT&T or Verizon or Comcast, whoever, to invest in putting these towers up. Is that something that is going to be looked at again, maybe to ease some of that burden? I mean, these rural areas, I know from law enforcement, not just internet access, but communication access, which is huge, whether we're looking at data or safety, public safety, people being able to make a call out to services such as fire, rescue, and otherwise, is huge in our state. And I think that's something that should be looked at as well.
Yeah, so two things on that point. One is that there was a big grant to try to service folks with internet via wireless technology. And that was through VTEL. And a lot of that was put into motion, but because of how mountainous our state is, that has proven unsuccessful, unfortunately. Hence this sort of bigger push towards fiber. There, in terms of just cell towers for cellular service, that provision is still the case. If there's a new cell tower that comes in, they can either choose to go through Act 250 and the local permitting level, or they can go through the Public Utilities Commission. That's what happened a couple of years ago, that that you could go to the PUC instead of going to the local level in Act 250. That option is still in statute. It's had a sunset date, and that sunset date just keeps getting pushed out and pushed out. That's a little bit of a separate issue than trying to get folks on internet. But yeah, I do think overall the communications issue is a real challenge as well. And I am not a technology and well enough educated person to understand if the one sort of internet fiber connection will help solve the rural communications problem, but I think it probably will help, I would think.
Thank you.
Regina?
Yeah.
A number of years ago, we were approached by the school district, and we formed a research committee that looked into the possibility of creating municipal wireless here in Essex Junction as a utility. And the reason we did it, we partnered with the school district, is because for them, it was an issue at the time. They had a small but nevertheless significant number of students who didn't have any access, as you're saying, to internet. And since schools now rely heavily on that, and just for example, we just saw with COVID, it put a number of students at a disadvantage, which is why they approached us looking into it. And we looked at the technology, and at that point, it just wasn't feasible. Ultimately, the savings would be good, but the regulation and technology was just beyond our capacity. But I'm wondering if that, A, is still an issue, and B, if it's an impetus for moving this forward.
Yeah, I think in terms of certainly what we've learned from COVID, where a lot of life happens online, and particularly from the education perspective, to not have internet access is a real challenge. And so again, definitely for the school district, I'm not sure if Westford was involved at the time, but certainly Essex and Westford at this point, this is a very big issue for them for some parts of their town. So it is definitely a big reason to be sort of moving this forward. I don't know if I mentioned Westford, but Westford Select Board has mentioned that they are interested in figuring out how to solve this problem. They're not necessarily going to put a question to the voters, but they are interested potentially if and when the Communications Union District is formed.
Okay.
Can I just, to George's point, this has no impact on affordability, just access, right? There's one thing I think George was alluding to. There's one thing to say that it's available, but it's not, I wouldn't call any of it affordable.
Right. So part of the Vermont Communications Broadband Board's mission is access, but also affordability. And so when they review funding applications, which they ultimately will still play that role, because it would just be the Communications Union District that would go to them for funding, as opposed to the internet service providers directly. That is a very big component of their funding criteria. There are also some federal programs that can help pay the share of the cost for the individual homeowner, so that can bring it down if you're under a certain income level. But I will say, for example, Northwest Fiber Works, the CUD that's to the north of us, they are working with Google Fiber as essentially an anchor tenant. Not the best person to help explain what this how this is all going to work or what this means, but essentially that Communications Union District is going to actually own the infrastructure and do the operations and maintenance of it. And then they're leasing it to different anchor tenants, Google Fiber being the main one. And so Google is coming to the table also with a significant equity, affordability mindset and mission as well. And so they're really trying to get the price points down to a affordable level.
It's the typical market-based economy thing of the more competition you have, then theoretically that would help to bring the cost down. That's a part of the hope, which whether that plays out or not, we'll see.
Sometimes it feels like we go around and around or something. It could be a lot simpler.
Yeah. But before we open the economic can of worms too far.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions for Regina?
Good.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Regina.
Yeah.
And Regina, I heard you got a new job, so good luck with that.
Yeah.
We're going to miss you.
Well, this is a very exciting meeting to participate in, to prepare.
Right.
And speaking of excitement, let's go into discussing about whether or not we should sell alcohol in the city of Essex Junction.
I make the motion. We Sorry,
It's all good.
too soon.
Yeah, there's not a lot to this. If you read the memo, we, in 1969, we voted as part of the town to allow the town to sell alcohol, which obviously included village establishments. And ever since then, all liquor licenses have been issued by the town. And so now that we are our own city, legal counsel has advised us that it's probably just good to dot this I and cross this T to formally take a vote on this. Even though you're currently acting as the local control commission, we have valid licenses. You recently approved a new license. This is just a little assurance.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Are there any questions? Imagine there are. All right.
Well,
Okay.
ask Amber's question.
Do you want to ask Amber's question?
Nope.
All right. Mutiny. That's what it is. Mutiny.
No, I was going to say, remember we started out about how to address certain things with a kick. No.
Great. So we'll go into 5F and to now again talk about everything we just talked about. Consider
Yeah, so
the ballot.
this is just, we haven't had any votes tonight because it was just in consideration of each of the items that has already been on the agenda going on to the ballot. So this would be our opportunity to discuss whether or not you want to include all of those items and if you want to change any of the language. Otherwise, this ballot language for whatever you approve will go off to Susan tomorrow to get those ballots ready.
Thank you, Brad. Maybe for simplicity's sake, are there any counselors who are unsure or unfavorable towards any of the items we've talked about?
No.
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 All right. Then if not, I would entertain the motion of approving the ballot articles for the November 2020 election as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, please say nay. Great, so that passed unanimously. Thank you all. Next is 5G and to discuss the update regarding retail cannabis sales.
Yeah, there's no memo for this. It's just an open opportunity. If Raj wants to kick it off, Wendy's also on. They've been a part of the working group and maybe just provide an update, Raj, of where you all have been, and Wendy can chime in too if there's more.
Sure, and Amber was part of that as well. We have recommended to the Planning Commission that they authorize retail sale in 2 districts along Pearl Street. TOD and HO. I can't remember the term, what they stand for right now, but basically it would be from what is essentially Post Office Square down just past the fairgrounds to about the new, just past the tractor place. It's there now. Manufacturing, processing would be in the light industrial zone, 2 or 3 different areas. The majority of that is back that way, sort of near Global. Cultivation would be permitted in the planned agricultural area, which is down sort of along Cascade. And what am I missing? Tier 1 processing can happen anywhere that there is a permitted home occupation. And that is a very minor operation. I think it's one employee. Usually it's the self-employed person. It's up to $10,000 in sales, and that's processing the product. There's been an updated map. The Planning Commission updated the use chart to reflect that. I believe all of that was approved. It was approved at a public hearing on August 4th for the Planning Commission, and now that comes to us to consider. It's separate here because it's part of an overall look at land development code, which is more extensive. We are kind of under a time crunch for this. The Cannabis Control Board has started considering retail licensing. My understanding is, and understanding with the Cannabis Control Board, it is hard the way they're doing things, I think. But my current understanding is that licenses won't be issued until October 1st. There was some concern for the past week or 10 days as they moved up the consideration date that once they issue a license, we then, as the local Cannabis Control Board, have to consider that license under the current LDC. And two things have kind of happened. The Cannabis Control Board has said, no, we're not going to issue those licenses until October 1st. And Regina pointed out that there is any that would have come to us get considered under both. So, and Regina, you can correct me as I butcher this explanation, but since we are considering amendments to the LDC right now, the application would be considered under both. And so she provided a great chart. I don't have to get into it, but I do feel a little bit, and Wendy, Amber, Regina, I don't know if you agree, but I sort of feel like the heat's off a little bit. So as we look, because of that, because we can consider these applications under the proposed LDC, and the fact that they're now saying they're not going to actually issue the licenses until October 1st. Looking at this public hearing chart, we don't need a Saturday meeting. We may not need a special meeting, but the warning is 15 days, and after it's approved, it's another 21 days that it has to sit before it goes into effect. I think we would all feel more comfortable if this were done well before October, or as soon before October as possible. I'm not trying to throw aspersions, but it seems like the Cannabis Control Board has said a number of different things at different times to different people. So today I'm believing they mean October 1st is when those licenses will be physically or digitally delivered, but I don't want to bet on it. So, I think if we considered the cannabis changes tonight separately, warn those for a public hearing, we can probably make it at a next meeting safely. Again, we need the 15 days, the 21 days, barring any changes. The caveat to that is we have people come in and make a case at the public hearing, and then we amend it. And if it's a serious amendment, we have to do it in 15 days. But, backing up with what Regina pointed out in terms of how they're considered under both, I guess it's not a problem. So hope that makes sense. Probably very long-winded, but so we can, I don't know if you had a chance, everybody had a chance to review what those changes were and agree.
I saw that in the red, on the highlighted in the red, the new language there. Yeah. Of course, we have a discussion coming up ahead, on the processing and the impact on our treatment plant. So
we do, what's happened in the meantime, because we didn't, we could jump on this only when we can jump on this. Apparently we do have a cultivator that has been licensed now up on Taft Street. So that's fine. Interestingly though, Regina, I don't know how that applies with what you had said before, but I guess it's a moot point because we weren't declared a local Cannabis Control Board before they were licensed. So I think that controls. that shouldn't be that huge a deal. It's a tier 1 small operation. I don't think it's going to really impact the sewage treatment plant too greatly, but that is going to be a concern. It was an interesting memo from Chelsea.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the intro.
Thank you, Raj. Wendy or Regina, is there more you want to make sure that we hear or talk about?
The only thing I can think of is that the tier 1 cultivation, and I don't know how it impacts our local code, and Regina might be able to talk about that more, is that tier 1 is exempt from wastewater, but I would hope that the local code, if there were, I think that the greater concern for wastewater is for an indoor operation, and if it would be outdoor operation would impact stormwater, but indoor operation would impact our municipal wastewater system. And I know Chelsea's doing a lot of testing with our tri-town town areas with the brewers, because they're impacting the wastewater system, and the organics are higher than they would be without the brewing, and then cannabis will also impact it.
I'm not sure about the existing tier 1 facility and whether that should have gotten any type of local approval or how that should be treated. I'd have to think a lot more about that.
Yeah, I did ask the CCB about it, and she said that it was because it was tier 1. The wastewater sign off was exempt.
I think any future tier 1s will have to go through the local, us acting as the local commission, and just apply to all we do is sign off that it meets our zoning, and that there's no reason that,
So go along with this discussion we're having now. I'd be interested to hear, because of Chittenden County, the number of MS4 or municipalities within our county here, Regina, how other communities such as South Burlington, Colchester, wherever, are addressing this issue we're talking now for the impact on and us being a tri-town, having a tri-town agreement. Obviously it impacts our partner communities, Essex and Williston.
Yeah, the wastewater plants, the different facilities are putting time towards looking into it. And I think Chelsea said that Burlington has one person actually dedicated to looking into it, because it is a far-reaching concern for anybody that's using municipal wastewater.
So the part B to the cannabis conversation will be, once we get this dealt with, we'll have to come back. We can come back, may want to come back and talk about, any of our ordinances and how we may want to look at odor. I think we're less under the gun for that right now. We have a lot more time for that. There are a lot of examples and a lot of interesting models out there, because we're not the first ones to do this. So, and with how we've dealt with cultivation, but it's the odor issue on this in some ways is not the same as like Green Mountain Coffee roasting for an evening. It can last many weeks or months. So it could be, not definitely, but it could be an issue that we want to get ahead of, but no rush.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the wastewater treatment work and thinking beyond that, but I can just say that Winooski also has established a local control board. I know Williston has also adopted zoning for particular uses in particular locations. I'm not sure about anybody else, but I know that's where those two folks are.
Thank you. And for our purposes today and just moving forward, should we approve of the LDC and or a portion thereof, like say just cannabis, if in 6 months from now we learn something, or the wastewater treatment plant says, hey, this needs to be looked at, it's going to have some detrimental impact, we can always change something again before we have to wait until the full LDC is rewritten. And that's a correct understanding, right?
Yeah, there's no limit on how often you amend your land development code regulations. So yeah, you can, it takes a little, it's a process and it takes a little bit of time as you're realizing, but there's no limitation on that.
Great. Appreciate that. Just want to make sure we keep the mindset of progress, not perfection. Great. So any other updates on cannabis?
I don't think so.
I can't think of any.
We're ready to dive into the next item of to consider approval of the Planning Commission updates to the Land Development Code and warning a public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, keep it rolling, Regina.
Okay. So I have a little presentation if that would be helpful for you. It's only like 10 slides just to give you a little bit of an overview of what's in the full LDC amendments. So if that works, I just need to be able to share my screen, Brad. Or Andrew, not sure who's
That was not me.
You should be good now.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Oh, I never know how to get, there we go. Okay. So what you've got in front of you, the Planning Commission has been working on for quite some time. And there are a lot of different changes within this whole document, as you can see by that track change version that you have. But for the most part, they're kind of collected into these sort of 7 buckets. So the first is acknowledging that in 2019, you had a new comprehensive plan and you had the 5 corners design plan incorporated into that comprehensive plan. So there were a few changes in there to address that. A lot to do with sort of bike and pedestrian improvements in the streetscape. So when an application comes in the village or the trunk routes, really bringing in some concepts about bike connectivity, bike facilities in terms of parking for both visitors and residents, and a number of different things in that realm. Also under this bucket is the Tree Advisory Committee had a number of amendments that they wanted to get in the landscaping section to really just help them do their job better. There's also a number of things in there in terms of addressing the lack of housing that we've got in the city, region, and state. This is just what we could do that were kind of some smaller tweaks before the Housing Committee came forward with what they're going to recommend. And I know that it's a little bit in flux now, whether they're going to recommend things to the town and the city, but these are sort of more minor. I wouldn't call them all minor necessarily, but they're not what's coming from the Housing Committee, just to be clear. Stormwater management, Chelsea had, and Jim, before he left, had a whole bunch of changes that were incorporated, including just greater emphasis on green stormwater infrastructure and low impact development. The intention there is to really make sure and try to deal with stormwater on site in natural ways rather than trying to pipe it and have more expensive treatment systems for the city down the road. Lots of different state statute changes that were incorporated. And then, of course, changing all the language from the village to the city and also from the Planning Commission Zoning Board of Adjustment model to the Development Review Board model and all of the different appeals that happen as a result of that. Then cannabis, just talked about that. And then just some cleaning up and some reduction of redundancy along the way. So I'll just go in a little bit more detail on some of these. So this is your an image from the Design Five Corners plan, and just some a little bit of language there to describe what we've kind of added into the LDCs that applicants will need to do when they come forward. The other piece with this is that currently right now in your village center district, you have a design review and historic preservation review standards. The Planning Commission is proposing that those review standards are expanded to all the trunk routes. So it's probably a little bit hard to see, but all the red outlined areas. So essentially out all five corners, not completely out towards Essex or that way towards Essex or that way towards Essex, but really just trying to emphasize design and again, really kind of enhancing the walkability of these areas. The other thing that we did was brought some reference to the non-motorized transportation map that you have in the comprehensive plan. So this has some proposed improvements in terms of future sidewalks and bike path connections. And so by referencing it in the LDC, that gives the Development Review Board a little bit more wiggle room to sort of require those amenities when developments are coming forward. Then on the housing front, accessory dwelling units, there were some changes to state statute on that. And so we incorporated those. Essentially, the changes are that the ADUs can be 30% of the primary structure or 900 square feet, whichever is greater. They can be permitted just with a zoning permit, not conditional use, because accessory dwelling units are supposed to be treated just like a single family house. And the other change is they've retained the owner occupancy requirement, but the owner can live either in the accessory dwelling unit or in the primary, or in the primary structure. So a little more flexibility there. There is an increase to the density in the MF1 and MF2 zoning districts. Just so folks know, the majority of those are pretty well built out right now. So it's not likely that this is going to result in too much, but if there is some room to add some more units in there, that would be great. Duplexes and triplexes in the R1 and R2 zoning district. So that's a fairly significant change. Currently, single family homes are allowed in R1 and R2. And of course, accessory dwelling units are allowed there as well, but just creating some more flexibility to potentially increase units there. Planned unit developments, they're just a very complicated review process, so just tried to clarify the purpose and intent of those. Also, it's just a complicated review process and really tried to minimize when they would have to be used. Then also, the Planning Commission is recommending that the parking requirements are reduced from 2 parking spaces per residential unit to 1 parking space. And they've also added some provisions and some guidelines for shared parking provisions. So if an application comes forward and there's an opportunity to sort of match up different types of uses that use the parking at different times of the day, there's an opportunity there to lower the parking requirements. Stormwater, talked about this already a little bit, not too much more to add. Lots of different changes throughout the various sections of the LDC associated with this and other changes to the city's permit requirements, but for the most part, those are all technical edits. State statute changes, just a number of different kind of minor things, nothing really too huge here. Then this change, of course, village to city, planning commission, ZBA to the DRB. Then I do just have 2 slides for cannabis. This is basically the use table that is in the track change version. There are also definitions that go along with those cannabis uses, and this defines what zoning districts they're allowed to be in. And then this is not a map that goes in the land development code itself, but this is a very helpful, informative map that just shows the state 500-foot buffer from the schools with the different use categories and what districts they're allowed in. So that is it. The only other thing I will say is just to clarify process a little bit. So essentially, the Planning Commission thus far has forwarded their amendments to the City Council. The action in front of you folks now is to receive those amendments, and then, if you so choose, to set public hearing dates at a date certain. And again, we already talked about this, but if you'd like, you can do them separately. We sort of set it all up so you can do cannabis on its own and move the full set separately if that takes a little bit longer for you to think through, because there's a bit of a bigger package of changes there.
Thank you, Regina. I realize one of the things you're hearing some pause from me, I'm realizing for the first time, is you said that duplexes and triplexes would be allowed in the residential 1 and 2 zones, which, as I'm looking at our current zoning map, basically every single place within Essex Junction, with the exception of the Hayden, Wilkinson, Cushing area, would then potentially have duplexes and triplexes, which is just something that, as I'm realizing for the first time, is sitting in a weird place. So I'm just naming that. It's sitting in a weird place with that. Thinking about triplexes in Countryside and
I see. Okay.
triplexes around on Pleasant Street.
The world changes,
It does. Oh, it absolutely does. And I totally understand that,
Build up or you build out.
totally understand that. Thinking about what that looks like for our community and how our community members feel about that is what's going through my head. That's all.
Yeah, and the one thing, it's not in the presentation, but I'll add, I can bring you to that page if you'd like, but the one component just for you folks to know is that there's 2 sort of parameters that the Planning Commission added there, which is the style of the structure still needs to be a detached single family style, if that makes any sense. So not necessarily sort of a row house kind of structure, more of a what you would kind of see where you've got some rehabs happening over time in an older, larger single family home.
Gotcha.
And there's also some restrictions on how much parking can be in the frontage. Just to sort of kind of address some of that. But it's a thing, it's different. And the Planning Commission certainly talked about it, but I'm not sure that you've had a whole lot of public engagement in the process thus far.
No.
Yep.
And this is one of those issues where you would love to have a lot of public engagement, but I don't know how you would do it, other than the usual routes. But you are right, it is a significant change throughout the entire city for our neighborhoods that could now become duplex. But I have a suspicion that a lot of them are already kind of ahead of us. There may be some there that are under the, I'm not sure. But I think it would be good to have more public input on this, but I don't know how you would do it.
Well, the reporter's here.
We can certainly leverage our reporting friends. We can certainly also make sure that when we warn the public hearing, we reserve the space to, for one, warn the public hearing to have that conversation, and to allow for the
Yeah.
conversation to happen and receive that input.
This is nothing new. It's the
No.
same thing we've addressed since I've been involved with this board or the planning commission prior to this. It's always been an issue trying to get public engagement, but
Yep.
hey, you can only do what you do. You can lead the horse to water. You can't make them drink.
Well, I think that's where I think we can go, and what I appreciated about the presentation is it explicitly called out that kind of an issue, which and this is no fault to anybody. When you read a meeting warning, it doesn't say to approve of duplexes and triplexes throughout Essex Junction. That is something that would garner attention. Whereas approving a land development code, what does it mean?
Maybe we need to think about when we warn these things,
Right.
A million.
you know, to make sure we're adding in not stuff that's not mandatory.
Right.
We put a narrative in a paragraph. We link to this presentation or a similar presentation. We highlight the changes that we think are significant, and we just understand that we might have one or two of these, and they might be in unusual times or places.
Right.
And you know, I do have another question though. Aside from that, you know, I skimmed these, and Tree Advisory looks like they had a lot of time and input in this. Can you talk about, I know you were the consultant on this process, but can you talk about the involvement of the Housing Commission and Bike Walk on this? I think the conversations I've had back and forth a little bit with some of the Housing Commission people were they.
Yeah, so the Housing Commission came and talked with us at some point. Time is hard to judge, and definitely explained that one of their first things that they were thinking about was inclusionary zoning. We just wanted to be able to sort of move this LDC package forward, partially because my contract technically on this work ended at the end of July. But also I think the Planning Commission needed to be wrapped up on this. And so the thinking was it made sense to sort of move some of this stuff forward before thinking about inclusionary zoning, because that in and of itself is a big thing to be thinking about, and figuring out how to get it done right. And then, you know, I don't recall the bike ped committee.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's always been kind of a thing for me. You know, we have these committees, we have these groups. They don't really talk to each other, and that is not, I'm not putting that on anybody. If anything, I'll bring it back to us and say we're not pushing for that, I guess, or something. But as a former bike walk person, I kind of really poured over the bike because I was very excited to read the changes to the bike things. But as I read them, I was, and we don't have to go too far into this, but as I read them, I was trying to figure out what business could we possibly put in here that would be big enough to trigger, you know, the shower changing room thing. As I went through the chart and imagined playing that out, it seemed to me you'd have to have a business that was 25,000 square feet to get to the shower changing room. And I have a hard time, I'm just trying to figure out what types of businesses are. So for instance, if they, you know, the building they just built over here on Park Street, there's a new bakery going in. In an aggregate fashion, I suppose there could be 25,000 square feet of retail space in the whole building. But I'm skeptical that the bakery or any of the individual businesses that are going to go in the new buildings that are built over the next 10 years on Park Street are going to be 25,000 square feet. And that's only my reading of the chart, if it's correct, because you'd have to, I don't want to go through it too deeply, but so I'm very excited about these changes. I'm just not sure they're going to come to pass. And so do you know, is that too fine a detail for right now? And that's only the parts that I've been able to, you know, we got this on Monday, so that's the only parts I've really been able to kind of dive into.
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And I do think there's probably some logic in having some of those other committees take a look. I'm just over here scrolling and scrolling to find that to find that section.
It's page 118, 119.
Okay, I'm almost there.
And again, we don't have to go too far. into
Yeah.
this, But those are some of the questions that, you know, I realize that, you know, we accept that there's going to be a public hearing. We're still going to talk about it after that public hearing. And there's still more opportunity there. So we don't necessarily need to delay the process. But
Yeah, and you know, and it's sort of interesting at this stage with you sort of receiving this package. You can, if you choose with the bigger component, maybe you do something different with the cannabis component, but just with the bigger component, you know, you could take a couple of meetings to think through this and figure out if there are changes that you want to make, because the statute allows for the city council to make some changes before you warn it for a public hearing, if you want to, and then you could get public feedback, you know, get feedback that way. Or you can warn a public hearing now, take all the comment and collectively think about what edits you want to make. And then it just needs to sort of like go back through the system. The planning commission just needs to see it so they can okay it and make sure it's technically correct. Then it comes forward through you, back through you. So that's a little bit more process, but either way, you've got the opportunity to sort of sit with this a little bit more and get some more feedback on it.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Amber.
I was just going to weigh into that comment. To Roger's point, we got this on Monday. This is a fairly large document, and I can definitely tell you that I have not read it all, though obviously I was on the planning commission, so I've read the previous version. But my position is, if there is an ability to move the cannabis changes through without committing ourselves to the rest of the changes, then that would be my preference tonight.
I agree with you, Amber. And my understanding is we can, if we look at the packet on this section, the second motion and the fourth motion apply only to the cannabis sections. And frankly, I agree with you. I think that if we were to move the cannabis portions forward and then sit on the rest of it and have us digest it, read it, talk with our neighbors, so on and so forth, that might help, I think.
yeah.
So along that line, if somebody wanted to,
Okay, coming. Coming. I'll move that we accept the proposed cannabis-related land development code updates as presented and approved by the planning commission.
yeah, let's have that one first. Thank you, Raj. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Great,
This
so that
one-
one passed unanimously.
This next one we should talk about the date
Yep.
first, obviously.
So knowing that we have to warn this 15 days from the time it is noted, or it's noticed, we could have the meeting on Wednesday the 31st. It would be a special meeting. Or Brad, Wendy, if we figure out a way to just move the meeting from the week before to the 31st, that way we don't have to meet more than necessary.
Yes, that would be the preference on our end.
So that'd be the 25th to the 31st.
Right, so no meeting on the, I don't know,
24th.
I'll take your word. No meeting on the
Eight.
24th, and
Sorry.
change that to the 31st.
Okay, if everybody's okay with that. Amber, can't see you. You good?
Yeah, she just put a thumbs up.
I'm good.
You good?
Well, the 24th, I've got the regional planning meeting.
Well, the 24th was our regular schedule meeting, I think. So that one wouldn't.
The 4th. I thought we were this.
August, you start the last one of August.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we're
right.
the second and the fourth. So
Right.
instead of being on the 4th, we'd
Right.
move that one from the 24th.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, gotcha.
All right. Then I'll move that we hold a public hearing on the cannabis-related land development code updates on August 31st, 2022.
I'll second.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, George. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Great, so that passed unanimously again. Thank you all, and definitely please let's all commit to taking the time over these next few weeks to go through these. I think this is the 300+ page portion of the packet, and use a highlighter when necessary. So with that, that portion of the agenda is done, and we will now, Regina, thank you for sticking around. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You as well. Thank you. And that will bring us into the consent agenda.
Move that we accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Also passed unanimously. And into the reading file and board member comments. Who has something they want to?
One comment, I was going through 7 days today. I saw this obituary. It's actually an individual who lived here in Essex Junction, Leo Lalanset. He passed away actually back in June. But the write-up, it was quite interesting. Just he's a World War II veteran, born and raised in New Hampshire, and but settled here in Vermont. He worked at IBM from 1965 to 1987. In World War II, he when he was 17 in 1942, he signed up and joined the Navy to fight in the war. And obviously part of the Greatest Generation. It says he earned 3 battle medals or battle stars at the Solomon Islands while serving in the USS on the USS Woodworth. And it also said that he met future President John F. Kennedy while doing torpedo tube maintenance on the PT-109.
Wow.
So, and after 20 years, it says after 20 years of service, he retired from the Navy as a ship fitter and chief petty officer. And then, like I said, came to IBM in 1965. His wife settled here, had a bunch of kids and 10 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren before he passed.
Wow.
So it was quite interesting. I found it very interesting and humbling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, good one. Good find.
Thank you for raising that. Does anybody have anything else?
No.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move you adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Raj. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passed unanimously again. Thank you all.